beauty and character of these desert horses, books that explain where our horses come from. A judge, former Arab Horse Society president, how many times?
This is the third time.
Third time. That's getting a bit greedy. Whose knowledge is gained from years of experience, and to my mind always promotes the welfare of the Arabian horse as a breed of quality, distinction and character. So it is with absolute genuine delight that there's no snow and that Gareth disappeared off to wherever. So please let me hand over the floor to Mr. Peter Upton. Thank you.
This is my camel stick, by the way. He's driving a camel. But yes, I've only got, I think, a month to go before I hand in the badge of office for the third time. I must be stupid. I did it 3 times. The only reason I did do it, I've been a member of the society for nearly half its life. Started in 1980, and I joined 49 years ago, so really. And therefore, I said, as long as it doesn't involve me in too much activity, I would be happy to be president for the third time in the centenary year. And let's hope the society goes on for another centenary. Not that I'll be around, or many of us will be around to see it. So I decided today, you can see there's quite a few things. Fortunately, James wrote me up, otherwise I'd still be looking for it. But here, she talks to her sat nav all the time, by the way. And so I thought I would just, and James has been told to tell me when my time is up. Well, you do this way. But so I thought I'd just spend the first half talking a little bit about the Arab horse in England, and the second half about a bit of life with the Bedouin. So. And I thought it was interesting, and only yesterday did I get a phone call from Scotland giving me some very interesting news. And so I thought it was quite interesting. I mean, most of us think of the Blunts as being, in reality, the first people to breed purebred Arabs in the country. We know that Arabs were coming into the country from about the earliest I could find, the 20th century, when 2 horses called Truncifice and Arundel arrived in England, time of King Stephen. Arundel, by the way, means swallow, Arundel, and therefore swifter than swallows, and so on. But it wasn't until much, much later. What was the Arab brought in for? And of course it was basically only stallions that came in. And about 300 or 400, we don't know exactly how many, Arab stallions came into this country because the Arab was the great improver. Words used by Napoleon, in fact. But so, why were they used? Because it was the only pure breed in the world. And as a pure breed, it was dominant in breeding. And so, all people were interested in those days was not breeds, but improving stock. So the Arab was used in all that, and of course the best known example is the thoroughbred, which of course is not, thoroughbred means purebred. And of course, the irony is the thoroughbred is not a pure breed, because there are unknown lines in its history. So, but when was the first Arab horses brought into England to breed purebred Arabs? Totally different idea. Well, I discovered only yesterday that possibly the first was long before the Blunts. It was the 7th Earl of Elgin, the chap who brought in the Elgin marbles to the British Museum, who in 1810 imported 4 stallions, 5 mares and 3 fillies at a cost of £50 and 10 shillings. That's fascinating. Here was a man who was bringing in not only stallions, because usually the Arabs only sold stallions. Why? Because they said they rode only mares. Mares were quiet in war. The stallions trumpeted. And also, as they had a lovely saying, which was, in her belly is my future, another foal, and on her back is my safety. But, so it was 90% of the horses that came in were stallions. Now, did he breed any purebred Arabs? He's got the mares, the fillies, and the stallions. That we don't know, but I'm trying to find out, because I'm paying a visit to the 30th Earl of Elgin later in the year. Interesting enough, probably the second person was Prince Albert. Now, you probably know, even if from no other source but from my books, that the Queen Victoria, and even later William, and some of the people earlier, received gifts of Arab horses as presents. And Queen Victoria annually received 4 or 6 stallions from the Imam of Muscat. And she didn't know what to do with all these horses, really. They're all written down in what is called the Royal Horse Book. It's not just a book, it's just a list of horses received as gifts and what happened to them. Most of them it says dead, worn out. But I don't know who wore them out, but that's what it says. But she had received so many that in 1840 Queen Victoria decided to give all the Arabs she had received annually from the Imam of Muscat to Prince Albert to start the stud of Arab horses at Windsor. Now, again, sadly, we have no recourse to him actually breeding any, but he at least was supposed to have started to stud, according to Queen Victoria's diaries, which fortunately I was learning. And she says, of all the Arab horses presented to the Queen, and sometimes to the Prince himself, by the Imam of Muscat, the Shah of Persia, and the King of Oud. I don't know if you know where Oud is. But anyway, and there's a picture of 2 of them, and one was as long as it was, you could have ridden up there and had all the family riding at the same time. Next person was a man called Charles Bracebridge, who lived at Atherstone Hall. And he imported Arabs in the 1850s, so still before the Prince, and bred Arabs, and it says clearly, bred Arabs at Atherstone Hall. Then there was a captain. Now the army, of course, was finding a lot of Arab connections because our army was also in India, where later my uncle was, fought in the First World War from India. This was a Captain W.A. Kerr, who imported a Siglawi stallion called Speed of Thought, nice name, and from the Gamusa tribe, which is one of the best tribes. It's a sub-tribe of the Fadan. And 2 mares were sent in by the British consul in Aleppo, poor town that's been demolished almost now, by Mr. Skene, who was the British representative there. Next chap, a chap called Lord Pigot of Patsall. Now, he only became a lord because he bought it. He had made his money pinching diamonds in India, along with Clive of India and co, and bringing them to England. But he also brought a number of Arab horses, and one is called the Pigot Arabian and appears in the General Stud Book of thoroughbreds. He was used for thoroughbred breeding. And he imported a number of horses from India, and actually bred some, and one of them a colt. When Pigot died, he was killed in unknown circumstances back in India. There were all these Arab horses, I don't know how many, but running in the park at Patsall on the Cheshire, Shropshire borders. And so they were, somebody, family members or something, put them up for sale. And one, a young colt, was bought by a certain officer. And that officer, I can't remember his name, I do know it, but, and that officer eventually gave the horse to a man who lived at Kinlet called Mr. Child, C-H-I-L-D-E. Now, he gave the horse because he was sent off to India himself, so he couldn't get the horse there. He was going to hire a horse from one of the dealers in Bombay. And Mr. Child was a keen hunting man. He went up to hunt with the Shires most years. And one day his groom said, "You've got no horses left, they're all lame." So he said, "No horses at all?" He said, "Yeah, there's a little Arab, 4-year-old Arab colt. What about you?" "Can't have an Arab hunting." "Yes," he said. And he was a big man, he rode at about 14 stone. And so he said, "Well, there's no choice, so I better ride the horse." Anyway, he became famous, and the horse was renowned within the Pytchley country, and he was, after that, because the horse was so fast, always known as Flying Child because of it. So we nearly reached the end of those before, but there was a Mr. Johnston of Annandale, and he imported a stallion called Minuet, and later some Arab mares. So there were quite a few people who were trying this idea of breeding Arab horses before the bloods got down to it. Now, here is I think the interesting thing at that point, because in fact at that point along came a chap called Major Roger Upton. Now I had a twin who's now dead sadly, but called Roger Upton, but he wasn't a major. So, this was much earlier than Major Roger Upton, who wrote a number of books on the Arab horse. And the first one he wrote, published in 1873, so we're still before the Bloods in 1878, called Newmarket in Arabia. And it's a fascinating book because it ends with this, and I've just taken what he's written. If we established a breed of pure Arabians, the course to pursue is to the attainment of a certain number of purebred Arabian horses and mares, the latter most likely in foal. It would be better if the government would undertake this, or private enterprise. Later he says, I don't think the government were likely to, and I should think that was absolutely true, they're not likely to get much right. And then he said, a national stud was wanted. Now, Upton was to visit the desert twice. He stayed in Aleppo with Mr. Skene, this consul at Aleppo, and he took him to visit the tribes. And the first horses he brought in were for a Mr. Sandeman Port in Sherry, but he was also an MP in England. And the horses there were actually bought by Skene, not by Upton, but Upton had a lot to do with when they came to England in 1874. And they're the first group of Arab horses that are registered in volume 13 of the GSB when Weatherby's agreed to open it again as a special Arab section in the stud book of the thoroughbreds. The previous stud books from 1714, because it's the oldest stud book in the world at GSB, mentions all the other Arabs in a separate section at the back, but they weren't registering new Arabs from the desert. So, for Sandeman, there came in a grey stallion who seems to be unnamed and not known, Yatigan, a stallion, a chestnut, and Zuleika and Heidi. Now, of those, they weren't very successful, but Yatigan does breed on to the present day, and so does Heidi, mostly through America. A year later, Upton himself, with one of his sons, he had 13 children, by the way, so he was a very busy man, went to buy horses for the Honourable Henry Chaplin. Now, he lived quite close at Blakeney Hall, Lincolnshire. And Upton brought in for him two stallions, Yoktan and Ishmael, and a mare called Karen Hatbush and another mare called Kessia. Now, of those, only one bred on. He actually crossed them with thoroughbreds. He bred thoroughbreds. And there was a very great deal of interest at that time, if you look at old records in magazines and newspapers, where people were thinking the thoroughbred was going nowhere, and that there was a need to use more Arab blood, to reintroduce Arab blood in the 1870s into the thoroughbred. As you can imagine, there were some people who were dead against it. It was a bit like Brexit and anti-Brexit, really. And others were absolutely pro it. And Upton was absolutely pro it. So this is why he was suggesting that we should start a purebred Arab stud in this country. Now, the interesting thing is that when he was visiting the desert on 2 journeys, most people think he only did one, but he did 2 journeys, he actually stayed with this Mr. Skene in Aleppo, who had saved the life of one of the sheikh's sons, and so was sort of very much welcomed by the Arabs, the Bedouin. And then, only 4 years later, in 1877, Lady Anne Blunt and Wilfrid Blunt decided to go to the desert to look for horses as well. Now, their idea of going to the desert at that time was to bring back some Arab horses, perhaps to start breeding pure, but really to introduce some more Arab blood into the thoroughbred. It wasn't to breed Arabs for Arab's sake, as it were. But when they got to the desert, they stayed with, believe it or not, Mr. Skene. And staying with Mr. Skene, before they go out, he takes them out to the desert to look at horses. This is what Lady Anne writes in her journals. We call them diaries, she called them journals. She was a very busy writer. They're in the British Museum if you want to read, library if you want to read them. There are 327 books. So it took me 8 years to read them all. So they left on the 27th of November 1877. and they travelled to stay with the Consort King. Now, Lady Anne writes on the 14th of December, we sat talking to Mr. Skene about horses. He, that's Mr. Skene, had come to the conclusion that the Arab blood should be kept pure, and that the only way to provide the breed of horses in England would be to breed purebred Arabs here. We have a plan to import to England 2 stallions and 4 fillies, later changed to 4 in-foal mares, for the purpose of establishing a stud of pure Arab horses, which is exactly what Mr. Upton had proposed in 1873, and obviously talked about with Skene when he visited him in 1874-1875. So this is quite an interesting move that happened at that time. The Blunts, as you'll all eventually know, purchased in all 20 desert mares, 12 desert stallions, and later to cover 12 mares of Abbas Pasha breeding and 8 stallions, 2 of which were bred at the Blunt Sheikhabad stud in Egypt. Notice I said Abbas Pasha, not Ali Pasha Sharif, those who know the story, because Ali Pasha Sharif imported other horses than the ones he got from Abbas Pasha. And some of those were very dubious in their breeding, including a mare called Halabia. If you look her up, Lady Anne Blunt cites definitely in her journal, and so does her groom Mutlak, that this horse was not pure. So, yet he appears in nearly all Egyptian bloodlines. So, these were the horses they brought in. Now, inevitably, I suppose, many of the, so in all that was 52 horses, so it's quite a big group of horses. Now, inevitably, some of them were infertile, such as Tamarisk, a lovely chestnut mare called Tamarisk. For those who've got my big book, she appears in, because if you who have my book, you'll see there's a picture of Tamarisk in there, I think. And eventually they sold it to Babylonia, but I don't think she produced any foals there either. And the others, they quickly realised were of not such good quality, and so they sold them on, many to Miss Dillon, the Honourable Miss Dillon, the lady who had the famous or infamous Elamia. And one other that came over, called, most people don't know about, was called Babylonia, and she died within a month of arriving in England. So, and then as to the Arab stallions, again, some were infertile, poor breeders. In fact, Lady Anne Blunt, in a good Victorian way, said, my 3 Indian horses, that was Hadban, Proximo, and Rataplan, she said, are not really boys. That's not infertile. And in fact, Proximo is considered infertile. So although some records still state that a couple of mares like Nafisa and the daughter of Radania were both by, it says, Hadban or Proximo. Well, they were not by Proximo, they were definitely by Hadban. When I've checked all the records most carefully, because I have a facsimile of all the Cravett stud books and Sheikhabad stud book, what I've discovered that in fact 2 foals by Rataplan were born, but one was dead on birth and the other died within a week, so no foals. So they gave him away to Mr. Potoki in Poland, which was no foals there either. So this meant that what they tended to do was cover many of the mares with at least 2 stallions, sometimes 3 different stallions. Let's try and get a foal out of the mare, so we'll try everybody. So you can't be sure necessarily which stallion they'd buy. But what you can say, it was a purebred Arab stallion, so at least it's not a purity issue. And that you'll find in the stud book quite record, because it's a very complicated stud book. It gives the hour of the day, the minute of the day the mare is covered. And if it's covered 2 or 3 times, each one is registered. It gives you the colour at birth of the foal. It gives you everything. The best stud books you ever saw. That was all due to Lady Anne Blunt. What was interesting is, generally speaking, not totally, but nearly all the best stock came from when they crossed an Abbas Pasha horse, an Egyptian horse, with the desert mares. Example, covering for example, who should we say, no, Ahmad is no good. One of the other stallions, he was by Masoud, but he was out of Queen of Sheba. So you've got your desert mare and your Abbas Pasha stallion. So they also did try inbreeding. They covered Masoud on a number of his daughters. Most of them were not successful. There were only about 4. They did do quite a lot of what I'd call instead line breeding, like half mother and half sister. Because, for example, Daoud, who was a daughter of Masoud, was out of Bint Noura. Bint Noura and Masoud were both by Aziz. So there were, but there is a sort of inevitability of inbreeding or close breeding within any closed purebred breed. So, really getting to the end of this list, but I was quite interested that most of the stallions never covered quite a lot of the stallions never covered at the foal, but Masoud was quite busy. He produced 126 foals in 13 seasons, and then he was sold to Russia for a phenomenal price. But also another interesting fact, of all those stallions, so that was the 12, 18, 20 stallions, all of them were sold on at some time, all right, 13 years before Masoud was sold on, but many were sold on immediately, like Merzak, though he did cover one mare and got Ridar, so a very important mare. But that's quite interesting, well, except when I said they were all sold, one wasn't, and that was the stallion known as the Little Lion. He was only 33, that was Faisal. So he died at home, but the others, or was put down at home, but the others did. But we therefore reach a stage, and this is why I'm jumping the gun a bit, where, and I use a pet of mine, and people who've heard me talk before will know that phrase of mine, it's called genetic erosion. And the problem is, they started with these 56 horses. Today, if you're looking for breeding crabbit stock, you're going to find that there are only probably 6 of the original mares and 7 of the original stallions who have lines today. All the rest are gone. Some of them do appear in not crabbit stock, which I'll explain in a minute, but only that. So really only 1/5 of the original mares that were imported have stock found today. And only 1/3 of the original stallions are stock today. So it's pretty, terrible genetic erosion. Therefore your genetic route is narrowing all the time. And this is one of the problems of a pure breed with the stud book that's closed. And I think it is a problem that those who may breed just crabbit horses have with this. Where do we go for another stallion? And so on. Now, that rather strange lady Wentworth, she was pragmatic in breeding. I would have said that Lady Anne Blunt was a preservationist. Lady Wentworth was pragmatic in her breeding, but also by then there'd been breeding Arabs within that original group with no introduced production of new blood for 25, 30 years then. So when she took over in the 20s, really, when she fell out with her father and took him to court and things, she, realising this problem, introduced some fresh bloodlines into the breed. And, all right, there was 2 desert horses that came in. One was Mirage, which most people think wasn't used here. She actually covered 4 mares with him. And, but called the horse another name called Miraise, that was a mirage, doesn't exist. And also the famous, or infamous, however you look at it, Skoronic. So she realised that there was this need for an outcross, and she was, for all her problems, she was obviously a great breeder of horses, and made the stud, which was pretty world famous already, totally world famous. And if you look at Arabs in virtually every other country in the world where there are Arabs, you'll find there's crabbit blood behind them. So she also did actually bring in far more that most people aren't aware of. Most people know about Skoronic, and of course later Darji. And of course Darji brought in some other lines, Ishtar and Cassia, and also the famous Elamir, and Lutrab, and who was the third one? Oh, and Dwarka. So that this is a problem for Crabbit people who particularly belong to the Crabbit people in Australia or England, is what constitutes a Crabbit horse. But I won't go into that now, but I did write an article in the last magazine about it, which probably upset some people. So, but she didn't just fetch in Darji, she fetched in Jerewan. Now Jerewan had the famous Maidan in her pedigree. Maidan was a phenomenal as he came, bred in the desert, went to, which one, Abdul Rahman Mini, dealer in Bombay, we call it now something else, but Bombay, because they sent horses over in Dows every year on the, and up to 15,000 horses went over in some years, all males, because the Arabs didn't want them all running loose covering mares, they didn't want them to cover. One stallion in the tribe, because and the sheikh usually kept him, and he was shackled, but he covered 40 mares or whatever. And so there were 3 dealers there. One was Abdul Rahman Mini, the other one was Jamshi, and the third one had a wonderful name. He was called Jamshahati Jahihi Boy. And you can't forget it once you've learned it. And all the Maharajas bought them for polo and for pig sticking and for gymkhanas. That's where gymkhana come from. And racing. Racing was a big thing, but it was Arab racing there. And then later, when the English army went there, the British army went there, including my uncle, they, just pre the First World War, they didn't take a horse all the way from England. They'd get to Bombay, and the first thing they'd do, they'd go over to one of the dealers and buy their horse. Now, Colonel Brownlow went to look for his horse. He rode with his gear at 19 stone. Big man. And he bought a 3-year-old colt and rode him on a 300-mile march, the famous 4th march from Kabul to Kandahar. He was killed. The horse wasn't. So another officer took the horse. And he stayed in India until he was 19 years old, carrying different officers, because then that officer went back to England. He would sell his horse to a new officer coming out. And in his 19th year, the chap who owned him then, a captain, Vasey, he so loved the old horse, he thought he'd bring him back to England. So there was a troop ship going back called the troop ship Jumna. So he put the horse on the ship, and it set off round the bottom of, because that was on the other side of India then, Calcutta, went all the way around the bottom of India, up through the Red Sea, got as far as Port Said, and that was when the Sudan ended up with Gordon and Khartoum and all that. There was war between the British. So the ship, being a troop ship, was stopped at Port Said because they wanted it to take a troop of soldiers to fight a battle at the bottom end of the Red Sea. The horse, by the way, was in a crate on the middle of the open deck. So the boat goes back with poor old horse still standing. You couldn't lie down, standing on the deck. And to this place in the south, I've forgotten its name, they fight what they call the woolly woolies, fuzzy hair, and beat them up. Got the troops back on the ship, back up to Port Said. Got the troop off, the ship went on its way then through to Marseille. The horse was lifted off the ship in a sling. Captain Vasey climbed on board. He rode it as far as P, but a little town where there was a steeplechase race on. So he put him in it and won it. Then he rode across France, got him on another ship across to England, where eventually he sold him to Miss Dillon, and who many of you know of, and she always worked all the horses, and she hunted him a lot, and actually entered him in another steeplechase at 23 years old, which he won. But later that year, he was out being exercised by the grooms, and it was icy, and he slipped on the road and broke a leg. But it says something for the toughness of an Arab horse, doesn't it? Anyway, I was getting away from the story of these horses that maybe increased. But Jerowan, this stallion, was a nice stallion. She didn't breed it, she bought it in, and he had mine in his pedigree. So you see, Lady Anne was buying in horses back, many of them with Crabbit blood, of course. but a lot of them with some other, what we'll call Old English blood. She brought in a stallion called Whalestone. She brought in a whole series of mares, Iorana, Algola, Chocolate Cream, Taimon, Rashma, Indian Sapphire, Zirial Wada, and Mylanda, who was of course related to Darji. So she actually, that's why I say, she was looking for breeding a better horse, and so was quite happy to bring in other lines. The problem is, some purists are not quite keen on those lines. A good example is a mare called Zirial Wada, and her daughter by Darji, called Zari, I bought for Geoffrey Plaister, the late Geoffrey Plaister. She produced some very good stock, Zarafa, who won many championships and so on. She is not acceptable to the present Cravat group because Zirial Wada goes back to actually to Bint Helma, who the Blunts had anyway, but also to a stallion called Jelebi, who was an Egyptian stallion. But she actually belonged to a Mrs. Nicholson, did Zirial Wada, and she was she wanted her covered by Silver Vanity, Lady Wentworth's. So she sent the mare up there, and she had a colt called ZS2. And if you look in your stud books, he's down as bred by Lady Wentworth. And so, but Nicholson didn't want, Mrs. Nicholson in Ireland didn't want a colt, she wanted a filly. So she said, can she stay there and cover her again with Silver Vanity, which they did, and they got this filly, which was Zirial Wada. So, the mother of Zari. But, so, why I mention that is that if you look further into the pedigrees and stud books, you'll suddenly find that there are quite a few horses that have introduced other bloodlines within the time of Lady Anne. And another good example is Covey, and it was still Cravat, right? Cecil Covey used Dargiel on 4 mares. Now Dargiel, as everybody knows, by Dargiel, that was okay. But on the dam side, went back to Noura, the mare from Bahrain. So there's another outside line that was introduced into Cravat. So what of the future for the Cravat? It's a difficulty. But what I did do, and this was very interesting, I think, I'll mention one last subject afterwards, and then I'll get down to living in Arabia. But I was judging, I think it was at the first, so many years ago, at the first international show, I judged the first show in Saudi Arabia, where the Crown Prince's horse won the championship, not with Kings, and so he said, well, no more shows. But they persuaded him by giving him the horse that 2 years later we could have another show there. And then, some years later, Prince Khaled had been started a show called the Al-Khalidia International Show. What they did, they paid for champions from all over the world to come to an international show. It was snowing, by the way. Freezing cold. But, and there were 5 of us judges, in the panel system, ghastly system. And the result of it was that when I was going home in the aeroplane afterwards, I looked at the results, because we were doing a catalogue, and I saw that every class, 3 classes for, colts, fillies, younglings, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 3 classes for mares, juniors, intermediate, senior, and stallions. Every class, the winner, and in many cases, in half the cases, the seconds, were all by one of 2 stallions. That's a worrying situation. And those 2 stallions were Marwan al-Shakab and W.H. Justice. Except for one class, which was the middle mare class. And she was won by Pianissima, who you've probably heard of, who was American champion, English champion, world champion at Paris and so on. But she was a half-sister to Marwan al-Shakab anyway. They were both by Ghazal al-Shakab. And, I contemplated this and I thought, my goodness, where are we going if all the horses in the shows are virtually branded the same couple of stallions? And of course, in a way, AI, and even worse, embryo transfer, can aggravate that situation by spreading the situation. So I was talking to Hamad Al-Thani, the young one, Sheikh Hamad Al-Thani, who for a time was the director at the Shakab study in Qatar. And I said, because I'd just judged the World Championship that year, Marwan Al-Shakab was a yearling, and he was champion there. And I said, tell me, Hamad, what is Marwan Al's strain? And he said, she's Ras al-Fadawi. Now, how many of you have heard of Ras al-Fadawi? It's a very rare strain. And I immediately struck me, but there was a mare that the Blunts brought in, who was Ras al-Fadawi. They didn't like her and they sold her on to Mr. Dillon. And so I looked at the pedigree, and in fact there's a sheet of it, and then there it is, just in the female line. And believe it or not, Marwan al-Shakab, in 12 generations, goes back to wild time. A bay mare imported by the Blunts in 1878 to Crabbit. She had 2 daughters with Miss Dillon who were sold to America. And so this was quiet breeding, domestic breeding in America, that ends up with Marwan al-Shakab. So that made me look at W.H. Justice, the other horse. So he's Siglawi Jadran. If you go back 15 generations with him, you end up at a mare called Basilisk, imported by the Blunts in 1878. So these 2 horses, they're tail fair mare, the 2 of the really most important stallions of recent years, both in their important female line go back to the original Crabbit mares. Interestingly, it's not the only ones. For example, with W.H. Justice, he has Russian lines, Polish lines, Spanish lines, Egyptian lines, Davenport lines, and English bloodlines. And also, in his pedigree, there's Masoud, Mirzak, Hadban, Azrak, Pharaoh, Maris II, Faisal, Skoronik, Radania, Dajania, Queen of Sheba, Hagar, Mashura, Jadrania, Farida, Soba, Bint Nuratu, Makbula, and Kassida, all those Crabbit horses. And it's exactly the same situation with Marwan al-Shakab, except that he has no Spanish or Davenport lines in him. So, as well as, going back to the Crabbit horse in England, it is painfully obvious that English Crabbit horses in many instances also include, most notably through Dowdy but others, quite a number of the other old English Arab horses that came into this country. About 400 came in between 1873 and 1971. And sadly, far too many never were bred from, which is a great shame. But that because the Blunts were so successful, and virtually all countries, whether it was America, Australia, most of their foundation stock they bought from Crabbit. If you look at Russian horses today, any Russian horse is 25% Crabbit. Because in 1936, 36 horses went over there, actually including Girard, the horse I was talking about a moment ago. And so Nassim, the famous Nassim, they went over and created a new dynasty over there. If you look at Spanish horses, the Duke of Veragua bought 5 daughters of Skoronik and an English stallion, and some horses from a chap called Brigadier General Lance, Society's president in 1921. His grandson is still alive in Australia, who I've met him many times. And a true Aussie, but with a slightly posh touch to his voice. and he breeds a few Crabbit horses. So if you look at all these countries, there is behind them a backbone, or nearly all these countries, a backbone of Arab blood. Even in Poland, an early breeder there, a colonel, he imported Racine in his old age, Racine, not Racine, and 3 mares. So the lines, and then of course Pharaoh, the other horse he was sent to put on, so his line, he had another line in Poland. So many of these can be found all over. And therefore, Crabbit has played a permanent role in the Arab horse throughout the world. So it's a difficult job to go on breeding purebred Arabs, and as many of you know, if you want cradle horses, there are some good ones in this country, but the country with the biggest number of cradle horses is Australia. It's got 3 or 4 times as many purebred cradle horses in England, and some good horses. Very good Arab country, lots of other good horses there. But horses like Rashan, who's a daughter of Greylad, son of Greylad, he was a national champion, beating Egyptian horses, Polish horses, all sorts of horses. So, you know, really, really good horses. And I certainly, for 20 years, have been advising a number of half-breeders to try and introduce some blood from Australia, either with straws or bringing in a colt, and 3 or 4 people. Anne Brown has brought in a number. What's her name? Caroline Sussex brought in one stallion. Had some problems with it because it wasn't very fertile, but she got foals in the end. Diana Whittam has brought in a very good filly from Australia of that Rashan line. So, you know, I think that might help alleviate the tightness of this genetic erosion. Now, one last thing, and then I'll shut up on talking about horses and just talk about Arabs a bit. But a lot of people say, you know, why were the Arabs so fantastic and totally fixed on the idea of purity of blood? Why purity of blood? It's not just about their horses, it's about their people as well. I was staying with the Bedouin once in Tunisia, but we were out hawking in the Sahara with Sakers, and an old man came in late, and even Prince Saud and Prince Badr, his brother, who were there, he's the governor of Hire, they stood up and moved aside for a little old man, only about this tall, who came in, who I was surprised to see. He was very old, obviously, but he had black hair at the front. But when his kaffir went back a bit, I saw he just dyed the front bit, all the rest was white. And I said to Prince Saud, I said, why did you stand up for this little man? He said, he's Ibn Hithlain. He's very poor, but that's the bluest blood among the tribes. And the same attitude was all the horses, but there was a reason for it. Who knows what the word telegony means? Or telegony? No? Well, the Bedouins believed in telegony, and because of this, Lady Anne Blunt believed in it. What it is, they said, that once an Asiel, a pure mare, was covered by a Kaddish impure stallion, all her future offspring would be tainted by that blood. Now it sounds biologically potty, but that's what they believed. And so, therefore, they were frenetic about making sure it was a pure stallion, Asiel, on a pure mare, because it would mark the horse for life, the mare for life. And Lady Anne turned down buying about 5 horses because it was clear that they'd been covered by something other than an Arab, a good, you know, pure Arab. Now, you say, I said, blinking nonsense. And then I was looking at the work of an artist. Did I write his name down? Yeah, Agasse, Jacques-Louis Agasse. He was also a Swiss, but he came to England to paint horses. And therefore there is a record of these horses. In 1891, a chap called Lord Morton carried out an experiment, typical Victorian. You know. He had a Chester Arab mare. Actually, she was about 7, 8 Arab, but she looked like an Arab mare. It's painting of her. And he covered her with a quagga stallion. Now, who knows what a quagga is? Well, a quagga is a sort of extinct now zebra. It's got stripes, but not quite so many as a zebra. It's got rather plain here, but it's all stripes up here and on the shoulder. And but in those days, there was still one. Now, how they achieved the covering, whether it was sort of, you know, the quagga didn't care if it was an Arab mare, I don't know. I was quite impressed to have an Arab mare to cover. And they produced a foal. Now, as you can well imagine, that offspring obviously showed signs of its hybrid breeding. You know, it had stripes on it and so on. Yeah. Lord Morton then sold this chestnut mare to Sir Gore Owsley, and he covered her with a black Arab stallion. It's a painting of him as well. Now, he appears in the GSB stud books. He was called sheep-diz, and he is there because he was also used for breeding purebred thoroughbreds. I will explain when I say purebred, because thoroughbred means pure, and of course Arabs aren't pure, thoroughbreds aren't pure. But what they did, and everybody knows about the three great, the barley, the dar, and the Godolphin. But in fact, over 200 Arab stallions were used from 1614 with a stallion called Gervais Markham's Bay, in the time of James I, to Wellington's brothers' grey stallion in like 1815. So, you know, they were using new imports of Arab blood for all those years. So 200 years in the development of the thoroughbred. Anyway, back to now the owner of the chestnut mare, Sir Gore Owsley, and he covered this same mare for 3 years with this sheep-diz, this stallion, this black stallion, Arab stallion, purebred Arab stallion. And the following 3 foals all had markings similar to those of the quagga, stripes along their legs and shoulders. Now, I can't explain it. If you want to see the pictures, the paintings of every animal mentioned there, the 4 foals, the one with the quagga and the chestnut mare and the black, all painted by Jacques Agasse in what they call the Hunterian collection at the Royal College of Surgeons. But anyway, in London, and I'm sure anybody could apply to see them, but it is quite fascinating that this should happen. So is there something in Telegram or not? But it was perhaps a reason why the Arabs were so concerned about this issue of purity of blood. So, just an interesting point that not everybody knows about, but I thought is quite a fascinating one. Right, now to living with the Bedouin. Is time all right, Stuart? Or run over?
I know about 10 minutes ago, but it's fine.
I'll be quick. I, when I was younger, did on a number of occasions go and spend some, some days, 10 days, staying with Bedouin, mostly with the Ruala tribe, which is in north, partly in Jordan, though they don't take any notice of all callers. And with the Beni Saka, quite a warlike tribe, but again 2 tribes where lots of the horses that came to Europe came from. And when I went with them, the easiest thing is to dress like they do. It's a dress that's suitable for that country. And there was a lot to learn from doing that, some of which there isn't time to explain. But so I thought it was interesting to bring along some Arab clothes and explain their uses very quickly. And I thought, but I would start with a couple of bridles. Now, many of you have seen these. This is a rashma, the bridle used by the Bedouin out in the desert. This is a very important one because this is the actual one that appears in the painting by Wilfrid Blunt on Pharaoh, who painted by Lady Anne Blunt, but it's got new woven on here. These shells, conch shells, and the little blue is a lucky colour for a horse. They're woven into the mane of the horse. Now, you'll probably note this is the throat latch, and you can shorten it. The chain, as you know, is like a halter, goes around the nose, but this is a hand-made chain, so anybody who feels it, you feel it's totally flat, so it doesn't, see, it's not like a modern chain. And there's one round. And I remember saying to one old Bedouin once, well, yeah, it's painted obviously, neck round, but I said, yeah, why do you just have one round, you see? He said, well, the desert's very big. So, answer. Now, this is made of goat and camel hair woven together, and you see it's got give and take in it. So it's a marvellous thing to read, and it's damn sight easier to hold than a slippery plastic or leather lead rein. Why so long? Well, what they did, when they jumped off the horse, they put it between the front legs, and they, with that hook at this end, they would just loop it round the pastern of one of the hind legs. The mare could then go on grazing, but couldn't gallop off. So, and that is the traditional Bedouin. Now they have a saddle as well, I didn't bring one, but they don't have a tree. So you need a horse with a decent wither, otherwise. So, and they rode without stirrup-irons. And the irony there is that they never trotted a horse. They either walked or they galloped, or cantered. So what's the important thing in showing today? The trot. So, but this I brought along, just to horrify you. This is a Turkish bridle for an Arab horse, and, or not all of it, part of it, built, very old like this, and cruel as they come. And town Arabs tend to use it as well, you'll see paintings with it. Now, how do you, well, there's a lens, but the lower jaw went through this ring, and then through there. This was therefore on the roof of the mouth of the horse. So when they pulled this scraped down that roof of the mouth of the horse, and this, if pulled hard, would break the lower jaw. Horrific. But that's what they wore. And you'll see on paintings, if you look, you'll see 19th century paintings with these appearing. So, very quickly, I had many fascinating meetings with Arabs and talking about different things, and I've tried to write most of them down. Some of them I can't write or publish because they're probably libelous, but I thought I'd just bring, some of you will know all this, but so I've got lots of it. There's a couple of Arab shoes. They usually leave you, it's got a heel, but they always stuck on there. So, and those are the Arab shoes. But the other thing is, I was with the sailors once and I put on another Czech kaffir, more like, not like that one, but this sort. And the badder said to me, Peter, have you got another kaffir? And I said, yeah. He said, could you change it? And I said, but you know, it's the same. He said, no, you're wearing a Jordanian kaffir. We want a Saudi kaffir. So they vary. So they're sort of rather fussy between the different countries. But so you get different dress in different areas. Now in the south, the men under their dish dasher, as it's called, or their thawb, actually wears a skirt. You see? Like that. Not very well sort of tailored, but they wear a skirt. Now in the north they wear trousers, and the trousers are even more bespoke tailoring. But you wear them, they're almost trailing on the ground actually, and of course you pull in the drawstring. So that's the under the dress. Over that they wear a dish dasher. And I think this is a black dish dasher. It's a lighter garment. I expect under there they wear some jockey briefs or something. And that's a black one. You can have it in, many are in white. And again, the collars differ according to the country. Some have a proper collar and cuffs. This one has cuffs. Others have open sleeves. And there's one called a thawb, where you have a very long sleeve that drapes right down. And I can remember saying, well, why do you have this big long sleeve? He said, well, don't you like to blow the nose? So, so that's that undergarment. And then over the top of they wear usually an abba. Now, when it's hot in the summer or in the winter, by the way, I'm taking my coat to that's all. And I say that because once I was asked to go and give a lecture on Arab dressing to a group of lady professors, some retired professors, and I thought, it wasn't too far away, and I thought, it's always tricky because they don't fit over your clothes. I know what I'll do, I'll put on my Arab clothes and then put a big hairy tweed suit over the top, you see. Because I thought, if I drive as an Arab through, I might get stopped by the police. So I drive there and I'm going in my suit, you see, and then when I thought I was going to do the Arab clothes, well, I took off the jacket, that wasn't a problem. But when I unzipped my trousers, there was a sort of audible, So I thought, that's not the way to do it. But anyway, so over the dish dasher, or thawb, in the summer or in the south, you would wear an abba. And you'll notice, particularly, probably the working men wouldn't, but most men don't work in Arabia anyway. But this a very light one. Now, you'll see that it does have, somewhere in here, a sleeve gap, but basically you don't use them. And what you do, and it doesn't have any buttons. Now, what the Arab is saying, that I don't work, because my hands hold my coat. So it's sending a message, I think, to the women who do all the work. But in where it's cooler, or in the winter, say up in North Saudi, you then wear a somewhat heavier rubber. Now, you can see it's mohair, and it's quite a heavy item.
I've seen you judging that in Jordan.
Yeah, you have. and that's it. You see, there are still not, and you'll notice where they set it right for you is not at the hem, where this one doesn't drop off hem, but at this point, where there's another joint all the way around. So that's where they change it. But again, the Arab would not normally use these. His hands would be on the inside. So, and you'd take it like that. Now, as well as that, if it was really cold, and I've ridden horses in 8 inches of snow in Jordan, you wear a farwa. Now this is a farwa. I don't know, feel the weight of it.
Oh, wow.
And it is lined, they vary their fashion in their dress the same as anybody else. And this has, again, sleeves, but again, not much used, like that. And it is really warm, and actually, you sleep in them often. Yeah. This is the wool of unborn lambs. They kill the ewes for eating, and if they're pregnant, they use this, because it has a special curl to it, which they make use of. But so, at one time, the fashion was for broad black and white stripes. Then the fashion became pale sort of ochre yellow, and then for a while there was the silver. Now it seems to be back to black at the moment, but it's just fashion. And the last thing I haven't mentioned about that is the hat, for want of a better word. Well, the first thing you wear, believe it or not, is a skull cap. All Arabs wear skull caps, like that. Now, I said I find that they tend to rise up, you know, and then they pray, and when they pray, they go, and they don't lose it. And I said, how do you do that? Camel urine. Camel urine makes it stick on. It's all right. Now, over that, you wear a kafir. Now, if you do want to be a popular young man, in particular, or in a popular old man, what you do, you get it starched. And the starching, you always fold it diagonally from one corner, like that, to another corner. And then it goes, this is the part that goes over. But they like a little tweak in the middle, like that, so they stiffen it with starch. And then that goes over the head, in this way, like that. Now, some Arabs only wear that, but they'll wrap it round. And you can wrap it round like this. Or if it's jolly hot, you just tip back each side like this. Like that, you know.
That's how you see them.
Like with a tent. And of course, if you're going to go galloping on a horse, you have to tie it down. So what you do, you put... Oh, there it is. You put one of these on. An agile is called, an agile. Now, agles, unfortunately, all of them are a bit small for me because I've got such a damn big head. But basically, on top of the hat, you put this. Now, when you put that on, I'll do it with this one. This, by the way, came from the Majali, the chief of the Majali, because I had written in my book about the horses that his grandfather gave to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, the last bit of there called Shams, which means the sun. And I'm not very good at putting these on, by the way, but that goes on so, and then this sits on top. That is our dress, basically. And of course it's nice and cooling. But if you're going to go for a gallop, what you do, you take that and you tuck it in there. And you do the same the other side, with this side, and then it stays in place. Yeah. In the south, they tend not to use coloured ones, they tend to use white ones. And some of them can be sort of really quite effeminate. That is a white kaffir from Abu Dhabi. So that's something of their dress. The living with them has its problems. Time to visit the toilet. Where is the toilet? Well, you go over the nearest dune. So you look at it and you think, God, it's as flat as the devil for half a mile. But as it's the only dune about, you go over the dune and it's about 30 other people. So in a way you lose all privacy. But there are other nice things about it. If you sleep, and it can be quite cold at night. So what some of the servants do, who are Sudanese, very beautiful Sudanese, they will take fire from the fire, and around your sleeping bag, or sleeping on the floor, on the sand, they dig a trench, and just only that deep, sort of, and they fill it with hot charcoal. So by the time you go to bed, you've got a warm bed, and all you do is you smooth it by shooting the sand over the charcoal, and you have a beautiful bed, you know. So, and then if they've had a good day's hunting or whatever it may be, then the Sudanese will always ask you. They first bring around a scent, which is like on drugs, you know, and they light it, and you put your kaffir over it and go, wow. But then suddenly you say, can we dance? Can we dance? Because we've had a good day's hunting. So what they do, they have a drum, which is a bit like a tambourine. It's a piece of wood like that, with a skin on one side and a hole in one side. And they hold it over the fire, and 3 or 4 of them, and they tap it, and then the heat tightens the skin, so they get them in tune, and then they start drumming these. And meanwhile, all the people gather around and dance. Now, how do you dance? Well, being men is not active. So what they do, I hope I get up again. They sit cross-legged in a circle, and you just go to the music. But yeah, that's what. But so interestingly, I'm sure when you saw that, it reminded you of somebody. Do you remember?
Arafat.
Yasser Arafat. I had tea with Yasser Arafat many, many years ago, of course. He was visiting Jordan when I was there. And Princess Alia's mother, Dina, had written a book called A Duet for Freedom, which was about the Palestinian situation. And basically, Yasser Arafat had come to visit her in Amman. And Sidi Alia said to me, would you like to come and have tea with Mum? She didn't mention Yasser Arafat. So myself, and actually my son was with me, we went to visit Yasser Arafat. And the ugliest little man you've ever seen in your life. About so tall. And he had a hand shaped like a little jelly. He did this soft, smoothie hand. But what was patently obvious from what he spoke about is that, believe it or not, he was a man of peace. Now everyone said, don't be silly, you know, they were fighting and all that trouble. But, in fact, Dina explained it up, she said, you've got to understand, he is a man of peace, and in fact, eventually when he spoke at the United Nations, it was proved so. But they said, he's got to show himself as a hard leader of the men to hold the people together. Because everything depended on a man as an individual. This is why there were great problems in Arabia with Saddam Hussein. A lot of people admired him, stood up against America. You know. But going back to the Rwanda, a big tribe, 250,000 fighting men still, all armed with Kalashnikovs. And they live, always did, it's changed a bit now because of the trouble in Syria, but they spent autumn and spring in Jordan. they spent summer in Spain and winter in Saudi. And so I said to the Sheikh Anwar bin Shallan, I said, what do you do? What do you consider yourself to be? Are you Jordanian? Are you Syrian? Or are you Saudi Arabian? And they always turn to the old men to ask him. They believe in the knowledge of the old men. So even the Sheikh will ask the old men of the tribe. And he turned to me and he said, we said, we are Ruala. Wasn't prepared to call himself any nationhood. So I said, well, look at it another way. What if, unfortunately, there was a war between Syria and Jordan? Who would you fight for? Jordan or Syria? Jordan's the old man, they talk again. And he turned back to me and he said, we would fight for King Hussein. King Hussein was alive then still. Note, not a country, a person. And that is the Arabs' attitude still. And this is one of the major problems that occurs because of all the troubles that exist now. And I'm afraid the dear old English and Americans don't understand it. That's the truth of it. Anyway, if anybody wants to ask me any questions, that's fine. But it'd be much easier if, when we're gossiping later, anybody comes up to me and asks. So I thought I'd just end, if you don't mind, and then I have finished, with, which I think in many ways sums up one's feeling when one is in Arabia. I'll find it very quickly. Here it is. No, it's not long. There's an area in the south of Jordan called Wadi Rum, quite near Petra. You've heard of Petra. And it was a great valley. It's an amazing valley, about 80 miles long, 1,000-foot cliffs, all as rose red as Wadi Rum, as Petra. And it was where all the tribes gathered with Lawrence of Arabia. Though according to the Arabs, he never ended up at Jeddah, he fell off his camel. And so, Wadi Rum is one of those amazing places where you get the desert legion there on the camels, wonderful people, and you could actually positively hear silence. It's a lovely place. So, this is what I wrote about Wadi Rum. Let us to Wadi Rum, and in that vast and silent place, burnt clean by sun and whispering sand, we'll ride as Bedouins a while, accompanying shadows, single fire, which lengthening to the east, obey the passing hours of each long day. And then beneath 1,000 stars, which punctuate the infinite sky, we'll spend the secret desert night, and by the flickering firelight, wrapped in our Bedouin robes, to sleep and dream of what life we seek. And in that vast and silent place, newborn, the day's pale eastern sky, we'll with the rising sun renew our purity, washed with the dew of morning's innocence, concealed by night, for light is life revealed. And though to dream as lovers do may seem a mirage in the sand, we'll ride once more towards the sun, and seek to find ourselves as one, a pilgrimage of passion spent in desert days and Bedouin tent. Thank you.
I think all of us, there's just nothing we can say to follow this, is there really? It's young Emily, wherever you are. Remember this night, young lady, you are exceptionally privileged as the rest of us are. Amazing. Thank you, sir. We have small gifts for you just to show our appreciation for you coming.
Look at this. Oh, look at that. Food stuffs. So my wife and I realised it was worthwhile me coming on. Oh, right. Is my hair good all right?
Yes, yes.
Is it just?
Just as another, we've also got a very small gift for Jane, who made the journey down with
She
Peter
did.
today.
Without
And sort
Jane, I
of
wouldn't
swore
be
at a
here.
sat-nav. We all swear at a
I
sat-nav.
didn't swear.
Oh, okay.
It's a habit.
Just argue.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Lola. I do love that. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for bringing it.